to Revolution. I'm glad we can be here together this morning. Hopefully you got a Connect card on your way in. I'd love if you take a second to fill it out. There's all sorts of different information you can request on here. You can also write prayer requests, which our staff team follows up on every week. And you can put those in the offering on your way out. Unless you're new, then hold on to that and bring it to the welcome and info in the lobby after service.
We have two announcements for you this morning. The first has to do with our groups here at Revolution. So my name's Kenny. If we haven't met before, or if you don't recognize me without a large beard. But nonetheless, I'm the executive pastor here at Revolution, and one of my roles in that job is to oversee our discipleship program, and the key piece of that are our groups. And at Revolution, we have a system with 3 different group types. The first of those group types are connection groups, and these groups last between 6 and 10 weeks, and their objective is exactly what their name suggests. Their purpose is to help you find and meet new people here at Revolution, build friends, build relationships, while doing some kind of fun thing. So we have a couple new ones starting this season. I'll be leading a group called Movies and Coffee, which is, again, just what it sounds like. On Monday nights, we're going to go to the movies, and then afterwards, we're going to find somewhere where we can get coffee and maybe some dessert and talk about what we watched. We have a group that goes to lunch on Sunday afternoons. Sarah Burnett, the lead pastor Josh's wife, is going to be leading a group for women that's going to be taking a bunch of personality profile tests, spiritual gift inventories, and kind of talking about how we're made. So there are a lot of cool options that you can check out in the hallway. The second group type that we have are called workshop groups, and those are a little bit longer. They last between 8 and 10 weeks, and they're often kind of a book study of some type. So we have a couple book studies that are going to be going on. Daniel, who is going to be preaching in just a minute, he's going to be leading a study of a book called Tangible Kingdom. Our lead pastor Josh is going to be leading a book study for dads called Scream-Free Parenting, which sounds great. Sounds like something that I could benefit from. And then our last group type are our local groups, and those are groups that don't have any end date. They run continuously, and they're geographically centered, and they're the place where we hope people find deep community and accountability, and a place where they can grow in their beliefs about who Jesus is. We have 5 of those. They're in Eastport, Annapolis, South County, Eastern Shore, and on the Broadneck Peninsula. So you can learn more about any of those groups I said, plus others after service. We have tables all along the hallway. You saw them coming in. And the group leaders will be there to give you more information. So I hope that you'll stop by, take a little time to browse, and I look forward to seeing you in some groups.
You can also pick your group by who has the best snacks out there, which is another strategy. I think they're on to me. I'm not actually contemplating the men's prayer breakfast that hard, but we'll see. Also, on your way out, you probably saw the Bloodmobile in our parking lot, and that is a place you can give blood today. So if you are able to give blood, this is a really nice way for us to serve our community right here in Annapolis. That goes right to Anne Arundel Medical Center to help people right here in Annapolis. So if you are able to give, make sure you do that on your way out today. As Kenny mentioned earlier, Daniel Clark is going to be preaching this morning. He's a member of our preaching team and helped curate the Jesus Through John series that we're in. Let's have a great Sunday.
Yes, I'm gonna take you surfing with me. Along summer day, safe to see it. I'm gonna take you surfing with me. Let's go surfing now. Everybody's learning how. Come on a safari with me.
I've lived in California, I think like 15 years total. I've lived in Maryland 15 years total. Back and forth a bunch of times. So anyway, I appreciate the throw out to California. It's good to be here. I'm glad to be here with all you guys. Everybody is sick. So I think sickness has come through my house twice in the last 2 weeks. Anybody else, anybody in their household been sick in the last couple of weeks? All right, like 2 people. So I guess it's just in my house. Just my house is sick. Don't come over, you're gonna get sick. I actually have this other thing that's been going on where if I take a big breath in, I feel pain in my chest and in my back at the same time. And so I thought maybe I have like a rib out. Some of the people in my work are like, yeah, you might have a rib out. So I went to the chiropractor, which was a terrible experience. And he was like, yeah, you definitely, he's poking around. He's like, you definitely have a rib out. And then he like lies me on the table, ties me up like a pretzel, like body slams me, and my ribs go. He's like, do you feel better? I was like, no. And so he did the Michael Phelps cupping thing, and so he put the glass cups on my back, and across my chest and used the little gun-looking thing and like sucks all the air out of it. And so now I've got these like massive hickeys all over my body. And then I'm bruising. And this was like a week ago. I was like, Heather, this is Heather up here. She's my wife. I was like, Heather, my back hurts. I have bruises from going to the chiropractor. And she was like, first world problems. Like, my back hurts because of cupping at the chiropractor. So I'm a pansy. And I went back because I wasn't all the way better. And I've got this, he did all of the same things, except now I have this cool like black tape on my neck. Do you guys see that? All right, so if I turn around, I don't have a spider on the back of my neck. All right, is Josh in here? Okay, well that would be his greatest fear, would to be preaching and find out he had a spider on his neck. So if you see that, don't shout spider. Make sure you write that down, don't shout spider. So we're going to be talking about a healing in the book of John, specifically in John 9. And we're in the middle of a series on John. And one of the reasons we wanted to do a series on John is because John was the author of the book. He was a disciple of Jesus. He was there witnessing firsthand all of the things that Jesus did. Like he was with Jesus when Jesus raised people from the dead. He was with Jesus when blind people received their sight. He was with Jesus when they're talking to Jesus and they're like, hey Jesus, we got a ton of people here. They all showed up to listen to you preach, but we don't have any food and they're pretty hungry. And he's like, don't worry about it. I'm going to take these like couple fish and some loaves of bread and feed everybody. And so he prays for it and it's like, go pass it out. I'm sure he's like, all right, we'll pass it out. And he was there passing out food to all of these people. Like, so he was with Jesus, which is pretty cool. John's also the fourth gospel that was written. So there's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And as the fourth gospel, just the context of who he was writing to, they already had the other three gospels. And so he's doing something a little bit different than the other three gospels. The first three gospels are giving the story of Jesus' life, his death and his resurrection, and John is doing the same thing, except John is specifically looking through the lens of belief. He says at the very front end, at the very back end, that he wrote it so that we might believe. And Kenny talked about how belief is a lot more than just a single idea about a single thing. That there's something that is true, and our beliefs are what we think truth is. It's kind of like, how close are we to what this is that's true? And a belief, they grow, they change, they develop, they can become more mature. I told John I wasn't going to do this, but I'm a liar. So I have a friend named John. He's kind of quiet at times. Sometimes he doesn't like people. Sometimes he does like people. He can be really friendly. He's on the guest experience team. Except he'll also have this like deadpan face and talk to you in sort of like sarcastic tones. But somehow you know he still likes you. He loves the Patriots, who by the way are going to win today. Because I'm watching the game. I've watched 2 games and they've won both times. And I'm planning on watching today. And over at his house, his wife makes awesome cookies. And if you go, you should eat 10 of them like I did last time. All of these things about John are true. All right? You might even believe these things about John to be true. However, there's a lot more to John than just these facts that I told you about. You're going to have to spend some time with John to really know John and kind of believe who John is. Does that make sense? So that was confusing. I picked a John and a John. So that's what the Gospel of John is about. That's what it's doing. And it can be broken up into 2 sections. So the first section is what's called the Book of Signs. There's 7 miracles or 7 signs that point to who Jesus is. And then the back of the book is called the Book of Glory, and it talks about the time right before, during, and after Jesus' death and resurrection. And the Book of Signs, you've got like turning water into wine, you have the feeding of the 5,000, raising Lazarus from the dead, and you have 3 healings. And so you have a man comes up to Jesus, an official, and he says, Jesus, my son's about to die. You need to come with me and heal my son. And Jesus, from miles and miles away, it says the man traveled like a day. He says, your son will be well. And his son was healed. And then there's another story of a lame man. He's crippled, he can't walk, he's by a pool. And Jesus walks up to him and says, do you want to be healed? Of which the obvious answer is yes. And he says, get up and walk. So the guy gets up and he walks. And then there's another one, the one in John 9, where there's a man who has been blind from birth. This is funny. Jesus spits on the ground, makes some mud, wipes it in the guy's face. It says, go wash. So the guy with like mud on his eyes is like, okay, he washes and he comes back seeing. And so Jesus shows up. Of all the miracles that Jesus did, of all the healings he did, John points out 3 of them. He points out one where the sick are healed, where the lame walk, and where the blind see. And he's doing this to make a very specific point. His point is that Jesus is this promised Messiah. He's the rescuer that would come. And the reason, and that would make sense to their culture, where to our culture it's like, I'm confused. Like, rescue from what? I don't understand. Well, what he's doing is he's referencing back to the very beginning, to the grand meta-narrative of Scripture. And what that is that before there was anything, God spoke and God was before there was anything, as my son would do. He spoke and created everything, and he made it good, and he made it perfect, and he made it wonderful. Creation was perfect. Our relationships with each other were perfect. Our relationship with God was perfect. And so God created, everything was good. Chapter 2, the fall. We've heard this story. God says, there's the garden, there's Adam and Eve, and there's one tree in the garden, and God says, don't eat from that tree, but you can eat from anything else you want. Enjoy. And they bought into the lie that what God said was not best. They disbelieved that God was the one who knew how to live by life best, and they went and they ate from that fruit. And when that happened, the world broke. And when the world broke, there was natural disasters, there was fighting between people, there was wars, there was sickness, there was blindness, there was lameness, there was death. And that broken world is what, so the world broke. That's the fall. Move on through time, and God called a man named Abraham, and told Abraham that from his descendants the whole world would be blessed, that they would get a taste of the things that God loves and God cares about. And there's also prophecies that are happening. There's prophecies about a day that will come when there will be no more sickness, there will be no more death, there will be no more dying. And so the Jewish people are waiting for this prophesied person, this Messiah, who's going to show up someday. They're waiting for that. And so let me read you a couple of these. I think they're pretty phenomenal. So this is Isaiah 53, and Isaiah was written around 700 BC. That's 700 years before Jesus showed up. And it says, say to those who have an anxious heart, be strong and fear not. Behold, your God will come with vengeance, with recompense of God. He will come and save you. Because the Israelites, they're like always under oppression. Like they rarely get to be in charge of their own land. They're taken off to foreign countries. During the time of Jesus, they're under like Roman rule. And then it says this, he says, then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, the ears of the deaf unstopped, the lame shall leap like a deer, and the tongue of the mute will sing for joy. And this is something that Jesus actually claims about himself. People are curious, like, is Jesus the Messiah or is he not the Messiah? And when some people came to ask him, what he says, and he references this, he says, hey, the lame are walking, the blind are seeing, the good news is being preached to the poor. Translation, yes, I am that Messiah. And it's interesting that these prophecies speak about this Messiah not just in terms of like healing, but also speaks about him in terms of having the power and the authority of God. One of the phrases that Jesus likes to use about himself is he calls himself the Son of Man. And we're like, okay, Jesus was fully man, cool. But that Son of Man passage comes out of Daniel, like Daniel in the lion's den. You guys have seen the book, the flannel graph, lions, Daniel, he doesn't die, tracking. Good. So this comes out of Daniel, and this is what it says. So Daniel, the guy who was in the lion's den, doesn't die, gets saved. He says, I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, there came one like a son of man. And he came to the Ancient of Days, he came to God, and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. And his dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. So when Jesus shows up and he calls himself the Son of Man, he's saying a whole lot more than I'm a man. He's saying I'm coming with all of the authority and the power and the glory of God, and I will have that promised kingdom where everything is made right again. So this is what John's doing when he picks these three stories of healing. Does that make sense? He's plugging this into the grand narrative of Scripture. And so we're going to look at John 9. And to know what's happening in John 9, it's important to figure out what happens at the very end of John 8. And at the very end of John 8, Jesus is in an argument with some it says the Jews, but these are the Jews who don't like Jesus. And Jesus is calling them liars. They're calling him possessed by a demon. They're arguing about Abraham. And then Jesus tells them, hey guys, before Abraham was, I am. He's claiming the same thing John claims, and that he was there at the beginning of time. And that I am statement was kind of one of those like code words for God. Kind of like if today we talked about the king of rock and roll, we would all be like, oh yeah, that's... Thank you. Or if you talk about like the Babe, you're talking about baseball players. All right. And Babe, that was a nickname too, George. Anyway, so what's happening is he claims to be God, and the people that he's arguing with pick up stones to throw at him and kill him. They're pretty upset about this. They're not just looking at him like, man, he's kind of crazy. They're looking at him saying, he just claimed to be God. And he's a threat. He's claiming to come in power and authority and dominion of God. Like, we need to wipe this guy out. And they pick up stones to kill him. That's what happens just prior to this. So it's an understatement to say there's a little bit of friction between like Jesus and the religious establishment. And so it says, and as Jesus passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, teacher, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? What like a weird question on the front end to ask, like, if this man sinned that he would be born blind. Like, hey, Jesus, was this guy going to do something that God was going to hate and therefore he's born blind? Jesus answered, it was not this man that sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Here again, Jesus is claiming that he knows how to best live, that he understands the human situation. And this is the funny part. Having said these things, he spit on the ground and made mud with the saliva. He put it on the man's eyes and said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. So he went and washed, and he came back seeing. Here again, Jesus is claiming his divinity. He's claiming the beginning of that new kingdom, that new creation. In the garden, in the beginning, it talks about how God took dust of the ground and made man. And then there was the fall, and man is broken, and now there is blindness and sinness. And then Jesus shows up. God himself, the same one who picked up the dust and made man, picks up some dust, puts some spit in it, which is gross, puts it on the man's eyes, and is initiating and showing that new creation is coming about again. It's phenomenal. And this guy has seen for the first time in his entire life. He has never seen anything before. He's never seen the stars. He's never seen a sunset. He's never seen trees. He's never seen his family. He's never seen anything. Who here's seen those videos where they put on the on YouTube where they put on the glasses where colorblind people can see again? Have you guys seen those? You guys watch them. They're fun. And so sometimes they put them on and the people are like, whoa, what? Whoa. And like people are talking and they just continue to like, I can see, I can't see, I can see, I can't see. Just to see colors. And other times people, they like start crying and just start hugging each other. And other times they're like, that's purple. That is purple. Is that purple? That is purple. And they're just like totally fired up. And they're using a lot of expletives. And that's just seeing color. What about seeing for the very first time? There's this video I found. There's an organization called 2020 that can perform this surgery and for kids in poor countries, and that makes them able to see again. So I watched one of these videos, and there's these two sisters, both of which are blind. They're in India. And the dad talks, and he's like, I could never make enough money to afford one of these surgeries if I worked day and night. The mom says, it shows her feeding these kids who are super dependent upon her because the kids are blind. It shows one of the girls there, her eyes are open, she can't see, and she's saying, kind God, why have you given me two eyes, yet haven't allowed me to see? And then these girls have this surgery, and it shows them taking off the bandages over their eyes, and they're just like, their eyes are going all over the place, just taking in all of this light, everything for the very first time. It's the first time they've seen each other. It's the first time they've seen their father or their mother. And it's pretty adorable. It's kind of like clicked it in for me, is it shows one of these little girls going to the window. She's walking around just fine before. But now that she can see, she's like, because she's never had to put together vision and like gravity, you know? And that's what this man is experiencing. For the very first time, for 38 years, he's never seen anything. And he can see now. And instead of people being like, that's awesome, they show up and they give him a hard time. He's like, man, this is a great day. This is a terrible day. So the neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar were saying, is this not the man who used to sit and beg? Some said, it's he. Others said, no, it looks like him. And he kept saying, I'm the man. I'm the guy. They're like, well, how are your eyes open? And he's like, well, the man called Jesus, he made mud, put it on my eyes, said to me, go and wash. So I went and I washed, and now I can see. They're like, well, where is he? He's like, I don't know. I was blind. And they're in a sense like putting him, like, it's like he's almost like entering to this like court trial. Like, well, how were you healed? Did it happen? Are you him? Is it not? Is it this? And I imagine this guy is like, I could see, like the whole time. And they're like grilling him about like how it all happened. And this is interesting. It says, so they led to the Pharisees, the man who had formerly been blind. And at first, I pictured like a bunch of people like, hey, come with us. And like they head on out to the Pharisees. But I imagine this guy was like that little girl who was like, like trying to walk. And he would not have gotten there if they didn't lead him. So they led him to the Pharisees, the religious elite. And it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. So the Pharisees again asked him how he received his sight. And he said to them, he put mud on my eyes and I washed and I could see. Some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God. This Jesus is not from God, for he doesn't keep the Sabbath. That's pretty stupid. They're like, he's like, he can heal my eyes. I was blind and I can see. And they're like, not on Sunday. It's actually Saturday. People are like, it was Saturday. Anyway, and they said to him, what did they say to him? So he doesn't keep the Sabbath. And others said, how can a man who is a sinner do such signs? And there's division among the Pharisees. So again they said to the blind man, what do you say about him since he opened your eyes? The blind man says, or the guy who used to be blind says, he's a prophet? And the Jews did not believe that he'd been born blind. So they still don't believe him. He's been questioned by like his neighbors and the townspeople. He's questioned by the Pharisees. The Jews aren't believing him. And it says, then they called the parents of the man who had received his sight. He'd never seen his parents before, ever. And now they call his parents in, which one would be humiliating. He's a grown man. They're like, what happened? He's like, I was blind and I can see. And they're like, whatever, go get mommy and daddy. They call his parents in. They said, is this your son who you say was born blind? How then does he now see? So he's in a room with his parents. This is the first time he's ever seen them. And the religious elite are saying, is this your son who was born blind? How does he see now? This breaks my heart. His parents say, we know that he was born blind, This is our son, and he was born blind. But how he sees now, we don't know, nor do we know who opened his eyes. You ask him, he's of age, he'll speak for himself. And his parents back away from the whole situation. And because remember, a couple sentences ago, you flip the page, right here they're trying to stone Jesus. They're trying to kill him. Right here, he's healing blind people. All right? And these parents are backing away. They don't want any part of it. And it says explicitly, his parents said these things because they feared the Jews, because they'd already agreed that if anyone should confess Jesus to be the Christ, to be that Messiah, to be that rescuer who was going to come and make things new, that he would be put out of the synagogue. He'd be excommunicated. So the risk is too high. His parents know this is their son. He was blind. I'm sure they heard the rumors that Jesus healed him. And they're like, I don't know. You talk to him. His first time seeing his parents, he's essentially disowned. Because they already know he's going to get kicked out of the synagogue. So, Pharisees are still upset. And it says, so for the second time, they called the man born blind and said to him, you give glory to God. We know this man is a sinner. And so he's continuing to get asked over and over and over and over again. And he's never seen ever before in his life. Talk about an emotional whirlwind. They said, give glory to God. This man's a sinner. And the blind man says, whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind and I can see. He's probably just, I can see. He's probably elated. He says, I was blind and I can see. They said to him, what do you do to you? How do you open your eyes? They're kind of dense. And he says, I've told you already. You wouldn't listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples? I love that part. It's what now? And they reviled him. They ridiculed him, saying, you're his disciple, but we're disciples of Moses. We know God has spoken to Moses, but for this man, we don't even know where he comes from. So the man answered, that's amazing. You don't even know where he comes from, but he can open the eyes of a blind man? So he kind of pokes back at him. And he says, we know God doesn't listen to sinners. If anyone's a worshiper of God and does his will, God will listen to him. Never since the world began, again, going back to that creation, has it ever been heard of that anyone opened the eyes of a man born blind? If Jesus were not from God, he couldn't do anything. And they told him, you were born in utter sin, and you would dare teach us, and they cast him out. What an emotional day. He can see for the very first time. He gets kicked out of the synagogue. He gets essentially exiled from the community. And on the same day that he's been able to see for the very first time. And they take the idea that this man is just a sinner to the core and kind of just jab him with that. Even the disciples asked on the front end, who's the sinner, this guy or his parents? To be blind was almost like the embodiment of sin, the embodiment of that brokenness of the fall. And they tell him, you've believed this all your life. You can see for a couple hours now, but you're still a sinner. Get out of here. So he gets exiled. And Jesus heard that they had cast him out, which tells me everybody in the town's talking about what's going on. It's one of those scenes, I'm sure they're in some room, but there's a whole crowd of people outside, what's happening? They're yelling at the guy who used to be blind. He wasn't blind. I think he was blind. What's happening? And so Jesus hears that they cast him out, they kicked him out. And he goes and he finds him. He goes and he finds him, and he says, do you believe, and don't miss this, in the Son of Man? Do you believe in the Son of Man, the one who has all of the authority and power and glory of God, and who will initiate this new kingdom where things will be made new? And the man says, who is he, sir, that I might believe in him? He's never seen Jesus. He doesn't know he's talking to Jesus. And Jesus says to him, you have seen him. It's the first time anybody's ever told him, look at that. Look at this. You've seen that. He says, you have seen him. And he's talking more than just visual sight. This man is aware of who Jesus is. He's aware of who Jesus is. And then and then he says, Lord, I believe. And he worshiped him. The believing in Jesus followed by worshiping cannot be separated. And so the Pharisees are nearby. And some of the Pharisees near heard these things. I'm sure when the guy left, some of the Pharisees were curious, was he actually blind? Probably weren't poser. They were like, what happened? So following him around. They're probably realizing maybe he might interact with Jesus, engage with Jesus. And so this guy's a popular guy right now. And so the Pharisees nearby, so a couple of them, hear that he said this. And Jesus says, well, right before, Jesus says, for judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind. Jesus is saying, you guys have been judging this man all along. That's not your place. You're not God. And again claiming, but I am. And those who say they have it all together and don't need God, and who believe they can do it better on their own and God doesn't know best, those are the people who are actually blind. And the people who say, I don't get it, I do need God, I am broken, those are the people who actually see that Jesus is coming to make well. And so Jesus tells these Pharisees, say to him, are we also blind? And this is what Jesus tells them. He says, if you were blind, you would have no guilt. Again, that if you confess, yes, I've messed up, I am broken, then that is who Jesus is coming to take the guilt away. But now that you say we see, your guilt remains. What a cool story. It's totally flipped. Jesus, the creator and the actual judge, is on trial by these posers. And at the very end, everything gets flipped over. And this whole story, different people are seeing Jesus different ways. Yesterday, I wrote out all of the truth statements and assumptions about Jesus in this passage. And there's 30, well, probably more, but there's at least 30 unique truth statements or assumptions about Jesus. All right, so the disciples on the front end recognize him as a teacher, and they're asking him theological questions. The neighbors recognize that there's been this claim of healing, and they're debating whether or not he was or wasn't blind. Is Jesus able to heal? Is he not able to heal? Jesus himself calls himself the light of the world, the Son of Man, claims to be the Messiah, doing God's work, sent from God, the Redeemer. Then the Pharisees say the exact opposite. He's a sinner. He breaks the Sabbath. He's not from God. He's a liar. And essentially calls him a false Messiah. And then the parents, afraid of the Pharisees, recognize that he has done something phenomenal, but they're not willing to take the risk to follow him, and they back away. Say it costs too much to follow Jesus. I don't believe that he actually knows how to live life best. He may have done some cool things, but I don't actually believe. And then you've got this guy, and it's amazing that his faith, his belief in Jesus continues to progress. The story starts off, he's sitting on the side of the road, and Jesus is walking by. Then he knows that Jesus is able to heal. Then he recognizes that Jesus is a prophet. He recognizes that Jesus can do the works of God. He recognizes that Jesus is the Son of Man. His faith grew and changed and it developed. And it became more and more true and more full of what is actually true of Jesus. And I look back at my life and I see that too. I grew up, my parents were Christians, and I kind of had flannel graph 2D Jesus. Those are people who my age and older remember the flannel graph. And it was okay, Jesus died, I can go to heaven, he rose from the dead, that's great. Then in elementary school, I started to learn more about the stories, more of the things of Jesus. In middle and high school, I went through part of the struggle that the disciples and this man went through. My sister, she's got autism, and I thought, if I was good enough, if I obeyed God's rules enough, then he might heal my sister. And it never happened. And I learned that if God chose to heal my sister, that's totally on God, that's not on me. Because I'm never going to obey the rules good enough. Then in college, I went through a little bit of a crisis of faith, and as I learned about different people having different views of Jesus, both scholars and people in different denominational backgrounds, and I was whoa, is this true or is it not true? Because something is true. It's not all true. And a professor of mine was like, Daniel, did Jesus rise from the dead? Because if that historical event happened, then we can try to figure out the rest of it. If he didn't, then who cares? And I was like, huh. So I thought about that, and I do believe that Jesus rose from the dead. And then after college, I went through a time I was clinically depressed. I was between jobs, weren't sure how to make ends meet. And it was like, if this is what God allows, like, is he actually good? What's the deal? Like, I hurt too much. And it came to a point where it was like, I'm going to have faith or not. I have to step and say, I'm going to believe or I'm not going to believe. And I chose, I'm going to believe. And now I'm learning more and more about this kingdom that Jesus wants to come, that Jesus is bringing and one day will fully bring. And about how God is currently at work. And catch this, shameless plug, wanting us to help make that kingdom tangible. See what I did there? Tangible kingdom, Wednesday, 7:30. And I think it's important for us to share our story too. This man wasn't afraid to talk about what Jesus had done in his life. He wasn't afraid to talk about Jesus regardless of how much he actually understood. So I just want to encourage us, like wherever we're at, to share our stories, to talk about it. If we think Jesus was just a guy who did some neat things, if we think that he had died and rose again, or anything in between, let's have those conversations in our groups, with our neighbors, in the car on the way home, with anybody you see in the band. And if we need to, let's have that conversation with God as well. And so we're actually going to move into a time of communion. If you're serving communion, you guys can come on up. And communion is a time where we remember what Jesus did. We remember, is this table going to collapse if I pick it up?
Probably.
Probably. All right. We're going to leave it right here. We remember what Jesus did on the cross. We remember that he died and that he rose again. And the scriptures tell us that before Jesus was betrayed, he took some bread, he took it and he broke it. And he said, "This is my body broken for you, take and eat." And he took some wine and he said, "This is my blood of the new covenant," emphasizing that new kingdom that's coming. He said, "Take this and drink." And so communion is a time where we recognize what Jesus has done for us and remember what he has done for us and remember that he is the only way that our sins can be wiped out and we can be brought back to God. So I'm going to pray. These people are going to take the bread and the cup. They'll be standing at the back of the aisles. And so after I pray, we can go on down and receive communion if we like. God, thank you so much for your scriptures. Thank you for the reality of you, for the reality of Jesus. God, I pray that we would see you for who you really are. I pray that we would expect to understand you more and more and more as life goes. I pray that we would be excited about helping other people understand you. And God, I pray that you would give us natural opportunities to talk about how it is that you're involved in our lives. In Jesus' name, amen. And so if you would like, they're down at the end. You can get up and take communion. And remember, and I think Josh is somewhere. He's back there with gluten-free communion. And so you'll take some of the bread. They'll hand you the bread, and then you can take that bread and dip it in the cup. Okay.
talks about amazing grace. Blind, but now I see. Let's all stand together and sing this first verse together. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved
worshiping with us today. Don't forget to check out one of the tables out front in the hallway and sign up for a group, and also donate blood. We've got a blood mobile out front if you can donate blood today. Thanks, and have a great week. We'll see you next Sunday.
There are many ways to say I love you. There are many ways to say I care about you. Many ways, many ways, many ways to say I love you. There are many ways to say I love you. Just by being there when things are sad and scary. Just by being there, being there, being there to say I love you. Cleaning up a room can say I love you. Hanging up a coat before you're asked to do it. Drawing special pictures for the holidays and making plans. You'll find many ways to say I love you. You'll find many ways to understand what love is. Many ways, many ways, many ways to say I love you. You expressed for
just like me. There was a light moving forward. I got the word and I got you. There was a song they were singing. There was a window to the moon. I saw light like a promise. I got the word and I got you. I got the word and I got you. emergency. 'Cause I've got to be free, free to face a life that's ahead of me. On board, I'm the captain, so climb aboard. We'll search for tomorrow on every shore, and I'll try, oh Lord, I'll try to carry on. I look to the sea, reflections in Empty pages won't ease my mind. A pen can sing while your words combine. If I can speak for whatever you hide. The call is up, the phone is hard. The end is now when there is no start. You can sell your soul if you can take part. Maybe I think too much. It's just my train of thoughts. With all it has seen and all it has Your eyes can speak if you can make sound. Your heart can dance if you can turn round. And your feet can seek if your head is drowned. The ones you left are the first ones now. The moments you seek are the ones to be found. And you can't get lost if you circle round. Maybe I think too much. It's just my train of thoughts. With all it has seen and all it has been. makes you confused. There's no hint that I'm trying to give you. The longer you think, the less you know what to do.
Revolution. We're really glad we can be here together this morning. Hopefully you got a Connect card on your way in. We'd love if you take a second to fill it out. There's a place you can write any prayer requests or questions that you have, and you can drop it in the offering on your way out. Unless you're new, then bring this card out to the welcome and info table in the lobby. We'd love to give you a gift to say thanks for checking us out.
We have two announcements for you this morning. First of all, I'm Kenny. I'm the executive pastor here at Revolution, in case you don't recognize me without a beard. So we'll just address that right out of the gate. I look weird. I agree. It won't last. All right. In any case, the big announcement from me this morning has to do with groups. So one of my responsibilities as the executive pastor here is to oversee our discipleship program, and that program hinges at Revolution on our groups. There are three types of groups that I want to kind of introduce you to as you for you to think about as you're going through the service this morning. The first of our group types here at Revolution are what we call connection groups, and those groups are exactly what they sound like. They're groups that last about between 6 and 10 weeks, and their objective is just to help people meet people at the church while doing something fun. They're great places to start if you're new to the church. They're great places just to go and meet new people, even if you've been here a long time. They're usually really eclectic, a good mix of folks who are new and folks who've been around for a while. We have several new connection groups launching this time that we haven't tried before that I'm really excited about. One of those is one I'll be leading. It's called Movies and Coffee. It involves going to see a movie and then drinking coffee. That's the pitch. That's all I've got. But I'm pretty excited. So we're gonna meet up on Monday nights. We're gonna go see a movie in the theater, and then we're gonna go somewhere after the movie and sit and talk for a bit and drink some coffee or eat some dessert. And that's the plan. And the goal of that group is just to meet people and make friends. We have a couple other connection groups that are going to be exciting. We have a group that just goes to lunch on Sundays and hangs out that way. Sarah Burnett, Josh Burnett, our lead pastor's wife, is going to be leading a group that's women only, and it is going to involve going through a bunch of like personality profile and like spiritual gift inventory things like the Enneagram and the Myers-Briggs and all that stuff, and just kind of talking about results and learning more about who we are. There are all kinds of groups that are going to be offered, and you can learn more about them out in the hallway after service. The second group type we have are called workshop groups, and those are a little bit longer. They're usually 8 to 10 weeks, and a lot of times they're organized around a book study. So Daniel Clark is going to be preaching a little bit. He's going to be leading one called Tangible Kingdom, based on a book of the same title. Josh, our lead pastor, is going to be leading one for dads only called Screen-Free Parenting. So just let that settle in as you're thinking this morning. So we've got a bunch of workshop groups, and then lastly we have local groups. And local groups don't have an end date, they kind of go on indefinitely, but this is a great time to jump into one if you haven't tried one before. They're geographically based, so we have 5 of them in Anne Arundel County. We have one here in Annapolis, one in Eastport, one on the Broadneck Peninsula, one on the Eastern Shore, and then one down in South County. And those groups are great places for you to kind of make deeper friendships, find accountability and relationships, and just grow in your relationship with God. So if you want to learn more about any of those groups, please make time at the end of service to check out the tables in the hallway. You can also go online to revolutionannapolis.com/groups, or on the app, you can click the group button. None of those things force you to do anything, but they're all ways that you can just get more information about how the groups work. And if you sign up, what you're signing up for today is just to kind of get on the email mailing list with information about the group. So I encourage you to look at things, read some of the descriptions, and go ahead and put your name down for some things that look interesting to you.
Also on your way out, you'll see the Anne Arundel Medical Center bloodmobile out front. So if you're able to give blood, this is a really nice way for us to serve our city. All this blood goes right back to the hospital. There is a need for it right here in our community. So if you're able to give today, please consider doing that on the way out as well. We're going to be continuing in our Jesus Through John series this morning. We're going to be hearing from Daniel Clark, who's a member of our preaching team, and he co-curated this series with Kenny. Let's have a great Sunday.
Morning? Yeah, it's good morning. Some of you guys were like, this is my only day to sleep in. I'm here. Well, we're glad that you're here. There's a lot of people who, it's okay, Josie. Josie, how old are you? She turned 2 yesterday. And she was sick earlier this week, along with like everybody else in Annapolis. So everybody's like gotten sick or has been sick or knows people that have gotten sick. And me, my like calamity that I have isn't so much like the flu that's been going around, but if I take a deep breath, yep, I feel pain like right here and right here. And so at work, some people are like, you probably have like a rib that's out of place or something like that. And I was like, you're probably right. So I go to the chiropractor. He's like, who's been to like you guys have been to the chiropractor before, right? Some of you, it's terrible, right? It's terrible. Anyone who says otherwise is not saying the truth, maybe. Anyway, so I go to the chiropractor. He's like poking around. He's like, yep, you got a rib out here, and then 2 on the backside. He ties me up into a pretzel and like body slams me on the table, because that's what chiropractors do. And my ribs are like, he's like, yep, there we go. You feel better? And I was like, no. Like, I'm sure he popped it back into place, but I'm still in pain. So then he gets those glass cups, like the Michael Phelps, like hickey cups. And so he put those like down my spine and around my like shoulder blade and across my chest. And he does like, sucks the air out of these cups. And so I've got these like giant hickeys forming all over my body. Then he's like, now reach across. And I was like, it's painful. He's like, yep, it's what I thrive on. And so I'm reaching across and that hurts. And so, yeah, anyway, that's my calamity. And I went back this week. Poor Josephine. Bye, Josie. So I went back this week on Friday. He goes through all the same things, except this time he grabs that like scraper thing and like, he's like, where does it hurt? I'm like, right here. He's like, excellent. Like scrapes my body. And then he put this tape on my neck, which I want to show off to everybody. You see this? See the rock tape? All right. So anyway, so now I got the rock tape. So if I am walking over here and you see the tape, I don't have this giant spider on my spine. All right? By the way, that is Josh's greatest fear, would be to be preaching and have a spider on his neck. Just so everybody knows Josh's greatest fear now. So we're actually going to be talking about a story in John. So we're in this series on the Gospel of John about where Jesus heals a blind guy. And something really cool about the book of John is that the author of John, named John, was a disciple of Jesus. He was one of Jesus' followers, one of his apprentices, so to speak. And he was there witnessing everything that Jesus did. And so he was there when Jesus walked on water. He was there when Jesus raised people from the dead. He was one of the guys when Jesus is teaching in front of thousands of people. And he's like, we got to send these people home so they get something to eat. Jesus is like, no, we'll take care of it. And he's like, but we don't have any food. And so they go ahead, and Jesus prays over a few loaves of bread, a few fish, and he's like, all right, now go pass this out. And I'm sure he's like, okay. And he's passing out fish and bread, and they feed thousands and thousands of people. Like this, John was with Jesus. He's not just like an eyewitness, but like a best friend. So we get this cool perspective in John. It's also the fourth of the Gospels that were written. So there's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And so as we read John, we also have the perspective that the original readers would have kind of the context of these other Gospels, these other story accounts. And something that I think is interesting is that John is broken up into 2 different sections. It's like the first section of John, it's called the Book of Signs, and there's 7 signs, 7 miracles that Jesus does that point towards who Jesus is. And the second half is called the Book of Glory, which is just story of the time right before, during, and after Jesus' death and resurrection. And in the Book of Signs, 3 of them have to do with healing. The first one is an official comes rushing up to Jesus and says, Jesus, you have to come with me. My son is going to die. You need to come and heal my son. And the man traveled miles and miles and miles. It says when he went home, he got there the next day. But when he's with Jesus, Jesus says, okay, your son will be well. And instantly, his son from thousands of miles away is healed. The second one is there's a guy, and he's been crippled for 38 years. So he hasn't been able to walk for 38 years. Jesus comes up to him and asks him, do you want to be healed? To which the obvious response is, uh-huh. And he heals him. He tells him, get up and walk. So the guy gets up and he walks. And John was there for these. He was watching these things happen. The third one is the one that we're going to talk about today. I think this is the funniest of the stories. So this guy has been blind from birth. Jesus spits on the ground, picks up like the saliva and the mud, wipes it in the guy's face. So now he's got like mud on his face, and Jesus says, go wash. And he's probably like, duh, jerk. And he goes and he washes and he comes back seeing. And what's interesting about these three stories, where the sick are healed, the lame walk, and the blind see, is that John is doing something more than just picking out like three interesting healing stories. He's tying into the grand narrative of Scripture, the giant overarching story of all of history. In the very beginning of John, he references this by saying that Jesus was in the beginning. And so this story is that before anything was, God was. And God created everything. The stars, he created Earth, he created all the other galaxy stuff, all the little molecules. Like, God created everything, and he made it good. Which means that it reflected who God was, and it was operating the way God designed. And it says that God took dirt from the ground, and out of that dirt made mankind. And it was good. And relationships between people were perfect. Our relationship, in a sense, with creation was perfect. There was no, like, mudslides, all right, after everything was created. And there was no sickness, there was no death, there was no disease, there was nobody who was crippled, and there was nobody who was blind. And then what ends up happening is they're in the garden, Adam and Eve are in the garden, and God tells them, you can have anything you want in this garden, just don't eat from that tree. And then they're tempted, and they bought the lie that they could live life better on their own outside of God's design. And so they went ahead and they ate fruit from this tree, and when that happened, the world broke. Creation broke, our relationships with each other broke, there was strife, our relationship between us and God broke, and all of a sudden now there's death, there's sickness, there's cripples, there's blind people. And the story goes on, and God calls this guy named Abraham, and he tells him that from him he's going to make a great nation. And that nation is going to be a blessing to everybody on earth. Everybody on earth. And that things will start to be made right again. And along with that promise, and Abraham was about 2000 BC-ish. And along with that promise, more and more promises are coming about someday this Messiah is going to come, this rescuer who's going to come and make creation new again, who's going to heal all of this brokenness. And this was familiar to the original readers of the book of John. This isn't some like abstract concept. For us it seems a little strange, but for them it would have been like an everyday idea that someday this Redeemer would be coming. And so here's one of the passages. This is in Isaiah 35. Isaiah was written about 700 years before Jesus showed up on the scene. It says, say to those who have an anxious heart, be strong and fear not. And then it goes on and it says, the eyes of the blind shall be opened, the ears of the deaf unstopped, the lame shall leap like a deer, the tongue of the mute will sing for joy. These are the scriptures that these people are reading before Jesus ever shows up on the scene. And Jesus makes this claim himself. There's a time he's reading in the synagogue, so he's kind of like in church. He's reading, and he's reading out of the book of Isaiah. And this is what happens. He reads from Isaiah, this is from Isaiah 61. He says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me and anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And what ends up happening is these people drive him out of the synagogue, go up onto a cliff with the intention of throwing him over the edge, but he slips away. Jesus is making this claim to be that he is this Messiah, this Redeemer, this rescuer. There's another time people show up and they ask Jesus, like, so Jesus, are you the one like we're waiting for? Are you the one who's promised to come? And Jesus responds by telling them, the sick are healed, The blind see, the lame walk. And so what John is doing with these 3 healing stories that he shares, he only picks 7 total, 3 of them are healing stories, is he's making the case that Jesus really is this Messiah, this rescuer, this one who's come to save, who's come to make everything new again. Does that make sense? You guys tracking? So it's not just like an individual story about Jesus doing a really cool thing and spitting in the dirt and making some guy see. It's about this grand overarching narrative of Scripture that Jesus is the one who can come and rescue and make things new again. So we're in John 9. And if you want to know what John 9 is about, it's important to know how like John 8 ends. Sorry. It's important to know how John 8 ends. And so Jesus is interacting with, it says the Jews, but these are the religious elite. They're people that don't like Jesus. And essentially, Jesus calls them liars. They tell Jesus that he's demon-possessed. He tells them that before Abraham was, he is, and they pick up stones to try to kill him. Like, that just went down. And can you imagine how upset you would have to be to, like, pick up rocks and try to kill somebody with them? Like, pretty mad. And the reason they're so mad is because when Jesus says, before Abraham was, remember, Abraham lived 2,000 years before this situation happened. I am. He's claiming to have been there before Abraham. And when he uses that phrase, I am, it would have been a trigger that he's claiming to be God. That, like, I am statement is the name of God. Kind of like if we were like, all right, well, if someone was like, hey, the king of rock and roll, who's that? Right. It would have been known immediately. It would have been like, oh, what's Jesus saying here? Like, everybody would have picked up on this. And so he claims to be God. These people are clearly upset. He's claiming to be the Messiah, the rescuer. And again, they're picking up stones. They go essentially to kill Jesus with these stones. And he makes it away without being injured. He must have been really sneaky. He's like, ha ha. I don't know how it happened. I imagine he didn't just like disappear and go away. I imagine like things were like crazy and chaotic. And everyone's running around. And someone's like, where's the stone? Where's the stone? And he's Jesus, so maybe he like hit all the stones? I don't know. I digress. Needless to say, there's a little tension. And so in John 9, it says, as he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth, someone who has never seen anything before. And his disciples, these are the people that are following Jesus around. They're kind of like an intern or something. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, teacher, who sinned? This man or his parents that he was born blind? Now there's some like major like assumptions and strange like ideas in there. Can you imagine like, I don't know, like, hey Jesus, like who screwed up? Did this guy screw up that he was born blind? Is there something he would have done that's so terrible that God would have struck in him with blindness before he was even born? Or was it his parents that screwed up? Guys, he's blind because the world's broken and there's blindness now. And Jesus talks about, in a sense, in this case, what comes about out of that blindness. So this is what he says. He said it was not this man that sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night's coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. He's claiming that he knows how this life ought to be lived best. That idea of being the light of the world is he's claiming to be that rescuer. He's saying, I understand how life ought to be lived. And then this is what he does. Having said these things, he spit on the ground, made mud with the saliva, put it on the man's eyes, said, go and wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. So the man washed and he came back seeing. And this is fascinating. So Jesus, the creator, the one in the very beginning who originally formed everything, including man, he spits in the ground, reaches up, takes that dust and dirt, the same thing Jesus himself used to create humanity in the first place, puts it on this man's eyes, and he goes and washes and comes back seeing. Jesus is initiating that new creation, that time when God is going to make all things new and all things right. He's doing a lot more than just this individual miracle. He's making a statement about who he is. And, oh, this is interesting. Have you guys seen the YouTube videos where the people put on I used to be colorblind and now I can see color glasses? All right, those are fascinating to me. I was trying to figure out, what would it be like to have been blind forever and now see? And someone told me about these glasses. And so you watch the videos, and sometimes someone puts on the glasses and they're just like they break down crying because they can see color now. Other times they start hugging their family members. There's one where this guy, he's like over and over and over because he can see color for the first time. My favorite one is this kid flips out. He's like, "Is that purple? That is purple. That is purple. It's purple. Is it purple? It is purple." And he's using a ton of expletives in the whole purple conversation. But this guy had been blind, not just colorblind, but never seen anything before. He's never seen the stars, the sky. He's never seen his family. He's never seen people. He's never seen his reflection in water. Nothing. And I found this video. There's this organization. National Geographic has a video. You can Google it, 2 blind girls I can see now, and it'll pop up. And there's this organization called 20-20-20. And what it does is it goes into, they go into impoverished countries and provide some type of simple surgery that allows blind people to see again. And so there's these 2 girls. They have been blind from birth. They've never seen anything before. They're I don't know, 7 and 9 or something like that. So they're little kids. And the dad is talking before their surgery, and he says, "I could never make enough money if I worked all day long to be able to afford one of these surgeries." It shows videos of the mom kind of scooping food into these kids' mouths because they're blind. They can't see the plate in front of them. It shows this little girl. She's sitting on a bed. It's the next day or 2 days away she's going to have this surgery. And she's saying, she's singing, "Oh, kind God, why have you given me 2 eyes and yet I'm unable to see?" And then they have the surgery, and it shows them, and they've got their eyes bandaged up. And as they peel the bandages off of their eyes, you can see them looking around all wide-eyed, and their eyes are having a hard time focusing. And that's the first time they'd ever seen anything. It was the first time they'd seen their sister, the first time they'd seen light, the first time they'd seen their parents, their mom, their dad. They'd never seen anything before. And these kids are just overwhelmed by the experience. And this was kind of adorable. It shows one of them walking over to go look out the window, and which makes sense because you're in this room and there's this bright light, and you'd be like, "What is that?" You want to go look out. But as she's walking, she's kind of she's stumbling all over the place because she's never had to tie in that vision with gravity before. All right, so she's stumbling over to the window to look out to the window, and I imagine that's the experience this guy is going through. This is the first time he has seen anything ever. He's probably totally pumped, totally excited. I can see, I can see, I can see, I can see. And so the neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar were saying, "Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?" Some said, "It is he." Others said, "No, it's like him, looks like him." He kept saying, "I'm the guy, I'm the man." Can you imagine? They're like, "Nah." He's like, "No, for real, I can see now." They're like, "No, you're not." He's like, "I can." And so he says, "I am he. I am that man." And so they said to him, "Then how are your eyes open?" And he answers, "The man called Jesus, he made mud, put it on my eyes, said, 'Go wash in the pool of Siloam,' and I washed, and I can see." They said, "Where is he?" He's like, "I don't know. I was blind." And so this is the first time he's never seen people before. And they're like, "So were you actually blind?" He's like, "Yes." They're like, "Really? Can you see?" He's like, "Well, there's the mud and the Jesus, and I can see now." They're like, "Nah, I don't think so. You're making this up." What a strange, emotional place to be in. You can see for the very first time, and as soon as you can see, people are kind of making accusations that you're lying about the whole situation. And so then it says, this is interesting, it says they led him to the Pharisees, the man who had formerly been blind. And before seeing the video, I pictured they're like, "Nah, you're making stuff up." And they drag him over to the Pharisees. But like, I don't think he could have necessarily gotten there, because he was probably like that little girl, like stumbling around, because he's never had to use his eyesight kind of with walking before, with his balance. So then he heads to the Pharisees. So they bring him to the Pharisees, and now it was the Sabbath day, which is a day of rest, that Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. So the Pharisees again asked him how he had received his sight. He said to them, he put mud on my eyes, and I washed, and I can see. And the Pharisees, some of them didn't believe him. They also said, this man, Jesus, is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. They're a little dense. Like, Jesus just healed this blind guy, all right? And they're like, nah, it's Sunday. Can't be healing people on Sunday. Nope, he's not the guy. Like, it's fascinating. The blind man can now see, and these Pharisees are the ones who are actually blind, not seeing what's happening right in front of them. Like, God has come. Jesus is here, and they're blind to what's happening. And so there's division among them. Some of them are saying he doesn't see the Sabbath. Others say, how can a man who's a sinner do such signs? And then they said to the blind man, what do you say about him? Does he open his eyes? The blind man says, he's a prophet. And so again, he's being interrogated. This is the first time he's ever seen anything ever. And he kind of gets dragged into this like courtroom type scene where they're like, all right, how are you healed? Were you actually blind? What's going on? How did he heal you? And over and over and over, he's like, the guy named Jesus, he spit on the ground, he put mud in my eyes, and now I can see. That's what I know. Maybe he's a prophet. It says the Jews did not believe that he had been blind and received his sight until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight. Now, that would be kind of humiliating. Like, this is a grown man. And they're like, so what happened? He's like, I was blind and I can see. They're like, nah, go get mommy and daddy. So they go and they get his mom and his dad. And remember, he's never seen his parents. He's never seen what his mom and his dad look like. And so his mom and his dad kind of come into the room where all of this is happening. I think this part breaks my heart. They ask the parents, is this your son who you say was born blind? How then does he now see? And this is what his parents say. Now remember, there's a lot of friction between the religious elite, like the religious establishment, and Jesus. The parents are coming into this room knowing that these people had just tried to kill Jesus. All right? So they're concerned about what's going on. And his parents say, we know that this is our son and that he was born blind. But how he sees now, we don't know. And we don't know who opened his eyes. Ask him, he's of age, he'll speak for himself. His parents said these things for they feared the Jews, because the Jews had already agreed that if anyone confesses Jesus was the Christ, they would be kicked out of the synagogue. They would kind of be exiled from the community. And so this poor guy, it's the first time he's ever seen. He's like, Mom, Dad, he's never seen him before. And what they say is, they're like, that's our son. But we're not going there with how he can see now. I'm certain that they were well aware that everybody was talking about Jesus healing this guy who used to be born blind. But they're afraid of the consequences of what it will cost them to follow Jesus. They're probably well aware that their son is going to get kicked out of community because he's essentially saying that he's going to follow Jesus. But they're saying, nope, not me. We're staying with the community with how things used to be. They're not willing to go there. The story goes on. So for a second time, they called the man who'd been blind and said to him, give glory to God. We know that this man Jesus is a sinner. The guy who just healed him, they're saying, no, he's a sinner. And so the guy who was blind answered, whether he's a sinner, I don't know. But one thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see. They asked him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? Like, he just continues to get badgered over and over and over. He's like, guys, just like, this is my story. You've heard it already. And what he says, I've told you already and you wouldn't listen. Do you want to hear it again? Which I think is pretty funny. Like they're like, hey, tell us again. He's like, you really want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples? It's hilarious. Like, he knows where they're going. They're trying to push him to say that Jesus is a sinner. He didn't actually heal me. I'm not going to follow him. He's not a prophet. He's not the Christ. Like, they want this guy to distance himself from Jesus and kind of denounce Jesus. And this guy's like, do you want to follow him too? What's the deal? And so these Pharisees, they get pretty upset. And so they revile him and they ridicule him. And they say, you are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but this man Jesus, we don't even know where he comes from. And the man answered, now this is amazing. You don't even know where the guy comes from, but he healed the eyes of a blind man? He's like, basically like, you guys are definitely out of the know, because this Jesus guy's doing some awesome stuff, and you don't even know where he's from. He says, we know God doesn't listen to sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, God listens to him. He's making claims about Jesus right here. He's stating what he believes about Jesus. And he says, never since the world began has it ever been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. He's making truth claims. He's talking about what his beliefs about Jesus are here. But the people answered him, you were born in utter sin, and you would teach us, and they cast him out. They cast him out. He has been blind his whole life. And we know from the question up front that that idea of blindness is the idea of like embodying sin itself. Everybody for his entire life has looked at this man and said, you are a sinner, you deserve this. His whole life. The very first time he can ever see, people are questioning him over and over and over. What happened? What happened? What happened? And then finally, he's honest. He's telling his story. And just a few hours probably after he's been able to see for the first time, they tell him, you're a sinner, get out of here. It's crazy. And then Jesus heard that he'd been cast out, which is interesting. I picture this as like it's in some like synagogue or some room somewhere, and like they're having this conversation, but the townspeople have heard and seen that this guy who was blind can see now, and I picture a bunch of people at the door like, what's happening? What's going on? Oh, they're getting mommy and daddy. Mommy and daddy are coming. Oh, blah, 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 blah. And then when he gets kicked out, I'm sure word spread pretty quickly. I don't know, maybe Jesus was having like a hoagie somewhere or something. I don't know. And he heard that he was blind, or heard that he had been kicked out of the synagogue. So Jesus goes and he finds him. And when he found him, he said, do you believe, but listen to this, in the Son of Man? And that's another one of those phrases, that Son of Man, that would have conjured up all of these ideas about Old Testament prophecies. Jesus isn't just saying, like, do you believe, like, in me, a man? What he's doing is Jesus is referencing back to the book of Daniel. Daniel was about like 500-600 years before Jesus ever was. And you guys have heard that, like Daniel in the lion's den? Good, we're tracking. Gets thrown in a den, there's lions, he doesn't get eaten. That's the story. So he's referencing back to Daniel. And Daniel, by the way, is a great name. Great name. He's referencing back to Daniel when he says this Son of Man, and everybody would have known what he was talking about. And this is another kind of prophecy, kind of speaking what's going to be happening down the road when it comes to this Messiah, this rescuer. Daniel says, I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, there came one like a son of man. Someone that looked kind of like a man. And he came to the Ancient of Days, he came to God and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom that all peoples, nations, and languages would serve him. And his dominion is an everlasting dominion, an everlasting kingdom, which shall not pass away. His kingdom will be one that will never be destroyed. And so when Jesus says, do you believe in the Son of Man, he's saying, do you believe that I have all of the authority and all of the power and all of the glory of heaven? And that I will establish a kingdom that will never end, and that I am the one coming to make all things new again. Do you believe in the Son of Man? Like, this is a big question. But the guy, remember, he's never seen Jesus before. He says to him, I believe. Or no, he says, where is he? So that I might believe in him. And this is the first time anyone has ever told him, like, hey, you've seen this. And so Jesus says to him, he says, you have seen him. It is he who is speaking to you. Which is interesting, telling a blind person, it's me, like yes, I'm speaking to you, but blind people recognize things by what they sound like. They know people by their voice, not by their face. So imagine when Jesus said, he's speaking to you, he probably went right back to the time where Jesus tells him, like, hey, go wash in that pool. And he says, Lord, I believe, and he worshiped him, which is the natural response when we understand who Jesus is. When we see Jesus as the rescuer, as the Son of Man, as the one who's initiating this kingdom, as the only one who can fix this busted world, who can fix not only like our relationships with each other, but our relationship with God, who can reunite that relationship. And then Jesus says, for judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind. And if you were in my house, around my table, that's when me and the kids would go, because he's speaking on a number of layers here. All right, and we've already picked up the irony of this whole situation, is that the Pharisees are standing above Jesus and above this man acting as judge. And Jesus is saying, you've taken my seat. You're not God. You don't get to be judge. And they're judging the Creator in this whole story. And Jesus is flipping that upside down. And he's saying, for those people who say, I'm not broken, I've never sinned, I don't need God, I know how to live life best, those are the people who are actually blind. And the people who admit to their blindness, to their brokenness, the fact that they're messed up, those are the people that Jesus is coming to heal. And a Pharisee was there. Some of the Pharisees heard him. And they said to him, are we also blind? And Jesus said, if you were blind, if you were someone who recognized that God knows how to do this life best and recognized that you're not perfect, if you were blind, then you would see. But he says, then you would not have guilt. He says, but now that you say you see, your guilt remains. It's such a cool story. And I love the idea of belief and the kind of being woven through this whole story of who's actually blind, who's not blind, the different levels of what's like happening in the physical level, what's happening in the spiritual level. And yesterday I went through and I wrote out all of kind of like the truth statements or truth assumptions about Jesus in this story. And I came up with 30. And I'm sure there's actually more than 30 in here, but there's 30 unique ones, some of them being repeated multiple times. You have the disciples who are walking along with Jesus, see this blind man, and they want to engage with Jesus with these theological questions. They see him as a teacher who can teach them some stuff, like theologically, like what does God think about this? Who sinned? And then you have the townspeople, and the townspeople are having this debate as to whether or not Jesus actually healed this person. Is he a healer? Is he not a healer? You have the Pharisees who are saying, this man is a sinner, he's not from God, he's a false Messiah. You have the parents who are afraid of the Pharisees, who are well aware that Jesus has healed their son, and they're saying, it's not worth it. They just back up from it, like, I'm not going there. And then you have this man, and it's so cool watching his faith like evolve and change and grow over time. His picture of who Jesus is becoming more and more accurate as the story goes along. At the very beginning, he's a blind guy sitting on the side of a road. Jesus is walking by. All of a sudden, Jesus heals him. He recognizes as Jesus is the healer. It goes on, he says, Jesus is a prophet. It goes on, it says he was sent from God. He can do the works of God. It goes on, and he recognizes Jesus as the Son of Man, as the rescuer, as the Redeemer. And he falls down and he worships Jesus. So that belief kind of evolution is changing. And if I were to tell you, if I were to tell you about a person, I can tell you a lot of true things, and the more and more time you spend with that person, the more you actually understand them. It's not like just a statement you make about somebody and it's true or not true. Our relationship with Jesus and our understanding of Jesus can grow and develop. So today, I was planning on, so I've got a friend. His name's John. John's he's a really friendly guy, but at the same time, he's kind of like deadpan most of the time. He'll like speak sarcastically, but tell you exactly what he means. Like, if you're in need, he's going to help you out. He's going to be a good listener. He loves the Patriots. By the way, the Patriots are going to win today. Yes. All right. Well, if I watch the game, they're going to win, because I've seen 2 Patriots games in my entire life, and every time they've won that I've watched it. So anyway, so I can so I can tell you about somebody, and they can all be true things. And if you were to come to the game with us, or go to his house and watch the game with us, by the way, you would get sick at his place because people are sick there. Don't go. You would get to know him more and more and understand and believe more and more true things about him. And the same is true with Jesus. And looking back, I see my beliefs changing and evolving and growing over time. So I grew up, like my parents were Christians, and I grew up in a Christian home, and there was like flannel graph Jesus. So anybody my age and older has seen flannel graph Jesus. Any flannel graph Jesus fans out there? Thank you. So there's flannel graph Jesus. It's like a piece of cloth you stick on another piece of cloth, and you walk Jesus around when you're telling stories. It's very two-dimensional. It's like, all right, Jesus died, he rose again, I get to go to heaven, that's cool. And then growing up, like I started understanding more of the stories and seeing more of kind of the three-dimensional Jesus, and understanding more about like grace and who he is. And then in like middle school and high school, I kind of had this crisis where, so my sister she's autistic, and she suffers because of her autism. And I thought like, man, if I stopped sinning enough, and if I prayed hard enough, then God would heal my sister. And a lot of us, I think, have had that kind of like wrestle before, but the truth is that whether or not God chooses to do something isn't based upon like how well I follow his like rules or how good I can be, because I'm never, ever, ever going to be good enough. It's because of God's grace and love and acceptance and my recognition of that he accepts me. And he just chooses to do what he does sometimes. And in college, I remember learning more about the kingdom of God, that my relationship that Jesus is much more than just my individual relationship with him. And that he's coming to make all things new, and he's initiating this kingdom and giving us tastes of what one day heaven will be like. But also I remember learning that there's so many like different denominations and different people, and people who believe and people that don't believe have so many different views about Jesus. They see Jesus in so many different ways, and I was like, they can't all be right. Like, what is the deal? And so I was having this kind of crisis of faith, and I talked to a professor of mine, and he was like, here's what it boils down to. Did Jesus rise from the dead? Because if he did, then there is like a Jesus that is true. And if he didn't, it's all bogus. And so it came to like a point of belief of like, did Jesus rise from the dead? So I wrestled with that, and I do believe he rose from the dead. And then after college, I'd been married for a little while, and I ended up slipping into clinical depression, which is more than just like, it's raining outside, or it's really cold, which is like what I go through now when it's 0 degrees outside. I hate that, by the way. Ooh. Anyway, it was like a clinical depression where like there was no joy for a long period of time. And I was like, if this is what God has for me, is God actually good? Do I believe he's actually there and he actually cares? And again there, it was looking at the cross and deciding either he was or he wasn't. And I do believe that the cross tells us that Jesus was good. That even if he chooses not to fix something now, one day he will. And it came again to a point of like, I'm just going to have to choose to believe here. And it's exciting now, kind of my belief, my understanding of Jesus is growing, and the idea that God is at work today all over the place. That kingdom is breaking in, those appetizers of heaven are happening, and Jesus wants us to partake in that. Unashamed, like group plug, he wants us to make the kingdom tangible kingdom group, Wednesdays, 7:30, my place. You can sign up out there. And so what we think about Jesus is, it can change, it can grow, it become more true to reality. It can become more broad, more deep, more tangible. And that belief, that story of our story understanding Jesus is one that we need to talk about. The guy in the story, with every single person he goes through, he's sharing his story. It started off just like, I'm blind and I can see. They're like, how? He's like, I don't know, I'm blind and I can see. Now there was mud involved. Like he shared what he knew. He's in front of the Pharisees are asking him, who do you say he is? He's like, a prophet? And then finally he engages with Jesus and recognizes him for who he is, that Messiah, that rescuer, that Son of Man, with all of the authority and power and glory of God, who's going to come and initiate this new kingdom. And so I want to encourage you guys to share your story wherever it's at. We got groups. Groups are a great place to share our stories. We got family. Share your stories with your family or your neighbors. But yeah, talk with somebody who's up in the band. Talk with, somebody volunteering. But sharing that story, I think, is really important. I think sharing our belief stories is really, really important. And also, maybe you need to share your story with God. Just spend some time talking with God about what it is that you actually believe about him. And the things that you're actually wrestling with. God's not afraid of your questions and your doubts and what's going on. We're actually going to move into a time of communion, which is remembering that death and that resurrection of Jesus. Which is really the crux of belief and the crux of our faith. If he died and rose again, there is a Jesus who can rescue us. If not, then there's not. But we believe here that there was, and so we take communion every week. If you guys are serving communion, you can come on up. And communion is a time where we remember Jesus. The scriptures talk about before he was betrayed, he took some bread, and he broke it. And he told his disciples, take this. This is my body broken for you. And he took a glass of wine, or in this case, juice. And he said, this is the blood of the new covenant, kind of that new kingdom poured out for you, for the forgiveness of sins. And so I'm going to pray for us. Then we're going to take communion. There'll be people in the back that have the bread and the cup. You'll take some of the bread. They'll give you bread. You can dip it in the cup if you want to remember along with us the death and resurrection of Jesus. If that's not something you believe, then you can just take this time to pray and reflect. So let me pray for us, and then we'll go ahead and we'll take communion. God, thanks so much for your goodness. Thank you for the fact that you love us. Thank you for healing this blind guy. Thank you for John who recorded it for us. Lord, I pray that you would help us see you more clearly, that we would understand who you are, that we would know you personally and completely. And thank you, God, that you are making all things new. In Jesus' name, amen. So again, we'll have somebody in the back on each of the back end of each of the aisles. Whenever you like, you can get up and you can go receive communion. We also have gluten-free with Josh over there in the amazing flannel. Is it flannel? It looks like flannel. It's flannel. And if you want to take this time to just reflect, you can do that too.
much more spiritually if we can just admit to our blindness and how Jesus has come. Help us to see. Let's stand up and we'll sing that first stanza of Amazing Grace that talks about that.
Amazing
And mercy triumphs over judgment. You delight in showing mercy. And mercy triumphs over judgment. You stood before creation, eternity in your hand. You spoke the earth into motion, my soul now to stand. You stood before my failure, carried the cross from my shame. Sin weighed on your shoulders, Thanks for being here and worshiping with us today. We hope you have a great Sunday. Don't forget to check out the group tables out in the hallway and sign up for something. And also the blood drive is going on today out front. If you can give blood, it's a great way to give back to our community. So we hope you have a great week. See you next Sunday.
The evening's long. His time is you. The pleasure is mine. The time and the place. Since it was